tonight. As you know, the campus is closed due to a water main break. So we will be having this class virtually. As part of that, all of the individual or small group activities that were planned as tonight's class will actually be completed by you as homework. And those assignments need to be brought with you on Wednesday and turned in before class begins. And I will give specific instructions when we get to each portion during our time together. So again, welcome to our third class on curriculum content and early childhood education. Today our focus is developmentally appropriate practice. So these are our goals for our time together, or our agenda, sorry. We'll be talking about what DAP means, so we'll be defining developmentally appropriate practice. We'll be thinking about what DAP looks like in action, and we'll be connecting DAP to the learning and development theories that we talked about last week. And then our objectives is that by the end of this class, you will have a clear understanding of what developmentally appropriate practice means, and that you'll be able to make the connections between DAP and the early learning and developmental theories discussed previously, which I think will help you to really put some meat behind those theories and think about what that means. The goal here is we really are providing some of the foundational pieces that lead to planning and curriculum. And this information will also be very helpful to you as you are working on the first project, the group activity, as those curricular models that you will be researching are directly tied to the learning and developmental theories, and we'll be breaking those down a little bit more today as part of this class. Okay, so we're going to start with developmentally appropriate practice. And the first item is a individual activity. And so again, this is going to count as homework. It was actually my intent that this would be a quiz. So I do want you to complete this while you are watching. So right now, rather than waiting until after you've viewed the entire video. It's not about a right or a wrong answer. It's really about getting a sense of what your knowledge is prior to going through the content. So as you know, for your reading that was assigned and was due this week, you were assigned the pages in Chapter 1 of the textbook that speak specifically to developmentally appropriate practice, and those are due today prior to you watching this class. And then the end of the chapter, the final section that speaks specifically to play as part of developmentally appropriate practice is the reading for Wednesday. In addition, you were assigned the NAEYC handout called The Core of DAP, and that is a handout that you received last week so that you could read it prior to today's class. I will also attach it to the email that is sent out with this link. So you have everything both in hard copy from last Wednesday as well as electronically. So I'd like you to find a piece of paper and a pen or pencil. And I want you to think about developmentally appropriate practice and write one sentence defining what developmentally appropriate practice means. Okay, so once you have written your sentence, I want you to circle 3 words that get to the core of DAP. Okay, and now I want you to put a star next to the one word that best describes developmentally appropriate practice. Okay, so hopefully that activity was helpful at getting you to really start thinking about developmentally appropriate practice and thinking about what you read in preparation for today's class. So on Wednesday, you will turn this in as a homework assignment. I also would like you to write a sentence or two saying how you felt about this activity and how it helped you understand DAP. This is what we would have discussed as a group or in small groups. Okay. So the core of DAP, developmentally appropriate practice, is a concept that really is at the center of all the work that we do. And the National Association for the Education of Young Children, or NAEYC, has really been the leader in helping us think about what DAP means. They are the author of numerous books around DAP, as well as articles and other resources. So the core of DAP, there are 3 main concepts of knowledge must inform decision making, goals must be challenging and achievable, and teaching must be intentional to be effective. So we're going to go through each of these. And again, you have your handout, the core of DAP, that provides some of this information. So when we think about the first statement, knowledge informs decision making, this is important. It's really about what you know about what children know and are able to do. And it's balancing what you know about children in general with what you know about an individual child. And so this connects very closely to what we've been talking about in looking at the District of Columbia Early Learning Standards and talking about the role of early learning standards in planning and curriculum. So early learning standards help us to understand what children should know and be able to do across the domains of development. And early learning standards include a developmental progression that helps you to see the progression of developmental skills. So typically what happens first and what happens next. So when we think about a preschool age child and you look under language and communication and with literacy, you can see what are some of the foundational skills around learning how to read that would be appropriate for a 3 or 4-year-old. And that those skills, like understanding the direction of text, that it's left to right. So you might, have menus or other printed items in your dramatic play area so that children can see. When you read books, you point at the words that help children to understand the direction of text. Another concept would be, a very early concept, is that print has purpose, and that people write for a reason. And so having children pretend to make grocery lists or write letters or things like that helps build those skills, right? And so the early learning standards give us some information about what children in general should know and be able to do. If in your program you use a formal assessment tool, that will also give you that information, right? So if we think about, for example, ages and stages as a screening tool that gives you sort of a snapshot in time about what a child should know at different milestones. So that can give you some developmental information using a developmental checklist. The CDC milestone moments is a good example of a developmental checklist that's available online. It's a good resource for parents, but helps you to know at each milestone, so 3, 6, 9, 12 months, and then a year and a half, 2, 3, 4, and 5, what children should know and be able to do. You might also use more of a formal ongoing assessment tool, such as Teaching Strategies Gold, that really breaks it down and has a lot of developmental information. So it depends upon what your program uses, and when we get to talking about observation and assessment, we'll look at this more. But those are other resources that give you a sense of what children in general know and should know and be able to do at a specific age or stage of development. We also need to understand what each child as an individual knows and is able to do. And so that's what is so important about being present in the classroom, observing children, taking the time to really get to know each child so that you have an understanding that, yes, this child is 4, but their development and where they are is going to be slightly different than the 4-year-old standing next to them. And so understanding where that child is developmentally, knowing what that child knows and is able to do. And then, as we are talking about throughout the course of this class, we also have to think about what is culturally important for each child. And so particularly during early childhood, what we value most, what we think is most important for children to know and be able to do are very cultural concepts. So I believe we talked about this last time, that in American culture we tend to focus on independence and self-help skills. Other cultures do not focus on that. They focus more on interdependence and feel that children grow up too quickly. And so when we are making decisions about what a child should know and be able to do, and doing some goal setting and planning, which we'll talk about in a minute, we have to have that cultural lens of, does this make sense, not only based upon the age of the child and where that child is developmentally, but does it make sense for the culture of that family, and are we working collaboratively with the family, or are we contradicting the family's values and beliefs? And so that's something that's very important to think about as you're planning your curriculum. So the second core concept of developmentally appropriate practice is goals must be achievable and challenging. All right? And so we're using the knowledge that we've gained through our understanding of child development, through our observation of the child, through conversations with the family, and understanding of culturally relevant context. We're setting goals for what we think children should know and be able to do, which are then going to influence our plans. And so we want those goals to be challenging, that we're helping move that child to the next level developmentally. You can think about this. Last time in class we talked about Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development, and that idea of where a child is in one place and they can do something independently. With another skill that's a little bit more complex, they can do it with support, and then the next step up, they can't do that at all. And so how do we set a goal that is somewhere within that zone of where we're pushing that child development a little bit further, but we're not going too far out of where it's going to be frustrating. So we're meeting children where they are. We're providing experiences that build upon what the child already knows. So again, this relates very closely to the constructivist theory of knowledge builds upon each other. And it reflects on what goals should come next, so that we have sort of this plan of where we're going with the child. And again, this really is dependent upon your knowledge of child development. And then the third concept is that teaching must be intentional to be effective, which means that we have to have spend some time planning not just what we're going to put in our lesson plan, what it is that we want children to know and be able to do, but what it is that we're going to do as the teacher to facilitate and support that development. And so you're making decisions and being thoughtful about how you set up the classroom, the goals that you're setting, the specific activities or experiences that you're planning, that you're using a variety of teaching strategies to meet the individual learning needs of the children. And again, this can connect to Gardner and the multiple intelligences and making sure that you're meeting every child's learning style, that you are using ongoing assessment so that you're regularly observing and understanding where children are, that you're aware of their growth and development over time as they're meeting goals and you're setting new goals, that you're interacting regularly with children in ways that support their play, that support their engagement and their learning, and that you're working very closely with families, because families have more information than you do and can give you a real sense of who this child is and what their home life is like. Helps you to make that homeschool connection. And you can also work with parents in terms of what are things that they can do at home that support the goals that you have set. And making sure that those goals also match the goals that the parent has.
Now we're going to apply the ideas we learned in the previous video to work with young children. Teachers can use a variety of sources to learn where a child is. They can use systematic observation, samples of children's work, other assessments, the child's family, key informants from the child's community or cultural group, and the research base on children's learning and development. We learn best when what we are learning is meaningful to us, when we can connect it to what we already know. Let's move into a preschool classroom and see how one teacher makes learning meaningful as she meets her 3 to 5-year-old learners where they are.
So how far should I go, Alexi?
Children learn best when what they learn is meaningful. Teachers determine what is meaningful to individual children and to all of the children in their classrooms by collecting information from multiple sources. Brenda Hieronymus learns what the children need in her classroom by using multiple sources of information.
When I'm planning, I have to decide what to put in the entire room. So I have to think about my whole class and what I know about that class. So at the beginning of the year, even just this few weeks into the year, I know the general age group. So I know I have 3 to 5-year-olds. I know how many children I had last year and what their experiences might be. I also know about typical child development and typical development in math, the construction of math knowledge.
To build the children's math knowledge, Brenda plans math games connected to one of the children's favorite books, I Went Walking.
Let's see how many animals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I didn't get to this one, 6. So right now I have 2 math games. One that's a little bit more complex because I have quite a few children who are returning from last year who will go to kindergarten, and I know what experiences they had last year. Then I also planned a game that's less abstract and more concrete for the younger or less experienced child.
Nizar's home language is Arabic. In English, he can only count consistently in sets of 3 or less. Based on Brenda's observations of Nizar and of the research base of children his age, she believes he should be able to count higher than that.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 R's. When I was thinking about Nizar as I put out the math game, I was hoping that he would be able to hear me or some other children use the rote counting sequence at least up to 6, since there are 6 dots on the die, or perhaps if they wanted to count how many spaces there were between the animals on the math game, there might be some rote counting that goes on there. I was also hoping that he would have an opportunity to demonstrate to me how he quantifies. Does he quantify globally? Does he quantify by using one-to-one correspondence? Is he counting? And if so, how accurate is he? Tell me again how far you're going to go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
You're going to move 6 spaces. You go ahead and move 6.
After working at the math table, Brenda goes with Nazar to the easier grid game, where she encourages him to think about small sets.
I think I will do
2 for you again. Now what? Two dogs?
Yes.
I wanted to see if he could count those using one-to-one correspondence, touching each animal as he said the counting word, and if he could do some comparisons between how many objects I had and how many he had. I also thought I could ask some questions like, how many more animals do you have to cover? If you roll a 3, will you cover all of your animals? How many more do I need to cover so I can cover all of them? 2 of them.
Brenda knows that Nazar is also interested in cars. She encourages him to build his math skills while he plays with the snap beads.
How many green ones do you have? I want to make mine just like yours.
2, 3.
All right, so it's not an intentional math activity, but I feel like everything in the classroom has the potential for math learning and for me to ask questions, especially with something like those snap blocks, because I know from my observations of him, he makes cars. So I thought, well, that'll give me an opportunity to ask, how many wheels do you have? How many more will you need?
Throughout the next week, Brenda continues to observe Nazar and the other children in her classroom to see what new math activities might relate to the children's interests. We went back to Brenda's classroom 1 week later to see what adaptation she made. In order to continue to build on Nazar's quantifying and rote counting, Brenda speaks with his parents to determine where his math skills are in his home language.
And the dad said, in his native language, Nazar can count to 4, which is about where he's counting in English, and that was why I was trying to model in the first game that I played with him, trying to model up to 6 on the die, and that in his native language, he uses one-to-one correspondence to solve problems.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
5 spaces. Do you agree, Nazar? Does he have 5? 1, 2. He's looking carefully. Do you think it's 5 also?
1, 2, 3, 5.
As I observed him initially playing the games, he seemed pretty excited, but the more it became, I think, a challenge for him to solve the problem, and the more he observed other children solving the problem that maybe he didn't feel like he could solve, I started to see him back away from it a little bit. No, I don't think I'll take this risk. This is a little too scary. Let me stay with something that's comfortable. I noticed that he just began to speak very rapidly, and he got the rote counting sequence up to about 4 or maybe 5, and then he started saying even words that don't exist, 11-teen, and things like that. I think trying to kind of cover up for what he didn't feel like he knew and make it over with quickly. Let's get through it. I'll point while you count. Ready?
1, 2, 3,
4,
16.
5, 6.
No, 11.
You'd like it to be 11-teen, wouldn't you? Try it again.
Brenda also incorporates math into a song the children have been singing in large group that holds Nazar's interest.
My white balloon goes sailing, oh so very high. All at once it goes ker-pop, another one will fly. How many have we popped so far? 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm still going to continue to keep the quantities of objects I'm asking him to solve problems with under 5 or 6 for a while, till he becomes more comfortable with that, and I have to write all this down so I can remember it, and kind of look for patterns. Okay, he was rote counting up to 4. Well, he's added 5 onto that now. All right, let's see if, in a couple of weeks, if I ask his parents whether his rote counting in his native language has increased to 5 or 6. I'm going to really keep them involved and give them ideas for what they can do at home that will be interesting to him.
Okay, so why I shared this video with you. This is a video that was created by NAEYC, as you can tell, quite a while ago, fashion-wise. But I think really gives you a good look at what developmentally appropriate practice, and particularly the 3 core concepts of DAP, what it looks like. So if we go, well, it's not going to let me go back. But if you think about those 3 core concepts, in terms of that all decisions need to be based on information, so understanding what an individual child knows, understanding what children in general should know, understanding cultural components. What did you see? When we think about the second statement that all goals should be challenging and achievable, what did you see? When we think about the third statement, what did you see? And so on the piece of paper that you've done the 3-2-1 activity, or the 1-3-1 activity. You've written a sentence or 2 about the experience. I then want you to write a few sentences about how this video connects to the core statements of developmentally appropriate practice. And so you'll turn that all in as part of the homework assignment for this course, or for this class, and you'll turn that in on Wednesday. So when we think about developmentally appropriate practice, it's really about how do children learn. That we want to make sure that we are setting up our classroom in a way that supports learning, that we are planning and implementing our curriculum in a way that supports child development, and that we're interacting with children in a way that supports learning. And so developmentally appropriate practice gives us a framework to help us think about how we can intentionally support development and learning. The next statement of how do we understand what children should know and be able to do are developmental expectations. And this really helps you to recognize the importance of early learning standards. It also helps you to understand the importance of assessment tools and observation, because this connects directly to the core principle that knowledge informs decision making. And then how do we plan to support development and learning for each child? And you can see in the video, she talks about how she used her understanding of child development. She used her understanding of appropriate strategies to support learning. A lot of what she did was embedded in play. But she also used her knowledge and understanding of the individual child. And I always want to reference Fred Rogers, or Mr. Rogers, who really had such an impact on how we think about early childhood, and his center continues to have that impact. But here is a quote from Fred Rogers. "Play is often talked about as if it were a break in serious learning. But for children, play is serious learning. Play is really the work of childhood." And this is an important concept, that as you are thinking about lesson planning and curriculum development, curriculum implementation, that it should be play-based, that all learning occurs through play. And things like worksheets or rote activities really do not support learning in the way that play does. That play really is children's work. And it's interesting when we think about the connection to developmental theories as well as to curricular models, is that within Montessori, for example, they actually talk about play as work, and they ask children, what work are you doing? Okay, so we're going to move into connecting developmentally appropriate practice to developmental theories of learning. So I have listed here the different theories that we discussed last week. I've also attached the handout that I gave out on Wednesday for your reference. So again, you have a hard copy that you received in class as well as an electronic copy. I broke this down a little bit more. When we talked about this on Wednesday, we connected these theories to specific theorists. So for example, multiple intelligences is the work of Howard Gardner. But also as we look at like the constructionist theory, there are multiple theorists that connects to who think about this in a little bit different ways. Behaviorism also has several different theorists, cognitive development. And so I really encourage you, as you're thinking about these different theories and what they mean, to refer back to that handout and that resource. And so on a separate piece of paper, I want you to pick one of these theories, to write 1 or 2 sentences defining what the theory means, to list 1 or 2 theorists that are connected to that theory, and to connect it to developmentally appropriate practice. Again, you will be doing that and turning that in on Wednesday as part of credit for this course, this class. In addition, I have attached a copy of this PowerPoint. It does not have the video in it, but it does have each of the slides, so if you want to refer back to the content within the slides, you have that available to you. Okay, so thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation. It goes a lot quicker when I'm sitting here talking to myself. So again, please take the time to listen and to think about the content, but then also to complete the different assignments that you'll be turning in as part of this course. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Please do not pause to reach out to me if you have any questions. Take care.